Hello and welcome to Florida Basketball Hour. I am Neil Blackman, Saturday Down South. On this episode, guys, Florida's going to the Final Four. The Gators are going to the Final Four. I don't even know where to begin, quite honestly. Like, what I just saw is why sports are the best. They're just the best thing. And there's really not any other way to kind of explain everything that happened in this game in the sense that sorry about that, guys. I'm trying to get the link to our show here, and something just came up. That's going to not ruin my night, and I know it's not going to ruin anybody else's. Okay, so, Florida's down 9 points. And I got Fawcett too, which makes me extremely happy. Fawcett being super patient tonight. I had to write for Saturday Down South, and I was without words. I'm still a little bit at a loss. So Florida was down 9 points, and after the JT Toppin layup, which was the 387th pick and roll that just clobbered Florida, and it all seemed absolutely hopeless. And suddenly Florida's in the Final Four. Eric Fawcett, GatorCountry.com, Burner Ball. Your thoughts on what you just saw?
I think it was a reminder of why basketball is great, and also why college basketball is great. And as much as 40 minutes matters in a game that's largely played in the 70s or 80s, in terms of score, just how quickly a couple of possessions can swing things. And this was certainly a situation where I thought that Texas Tech played the better game, but I think the two plays I look at would be the two times when Florida fouled a 84% free throw shooter in the 1-and-1 and a 70% free throw shooter in the 1-and-1, and they both missed the front ends of those 1-and-1s. So there's a situation where your expected value of those two possessions would be 3 points. And then Walter Clayton has the ability to hit just outrageous shots and take a couple of possessions that maybe on 3 possessions the expected value would be 3 points, and instead it's 8 points. And right there, you just on those couple of plays I mentioned, suddenly the Gators are up 8 points versus their expected value. And I know this is a really nerdy analytical way to look at it, but that's just kind of the way I look at it. Where and again, people that are into betting will know this, just however much it feels like the team that wins a basketball game is one that generally controls it. I mean, people who bet on games know that most games are, the spread's going to be set somewhere between 2.5 and 4.5 points. Like, most basketball games are played within 2 possessions, and the margins are small, and you can just see how quickly in college basketball, particularly where the game's not being played in the 100s, it's being played in the 70s or 80s. That just a couple plays can just swing it in an instant. So I will say too, if you're someone who's into narratives and all that, if you're looking for an example of the Gators just having this, I'm certainly not a Cinderella run. They're a 1 seed, but this kind of just charmed existence. I mean, again, there's of course the crazy shots that Walter Clayton hits, but those 2 front ends of 1-and-1s for Texas Tech that they missed, I mean, those are just massive. And again, everyone's of course sharing the win probability chart that had the Gators at a 96% win probability. And there was a lot of things that needed to go wrong for Texas Tech to lose that, but also really just a couple missed free throws on front ends 1-on-1, and someone like Walter Clayton who can make outrageous shots. So it was a game that was just kind of a reminder of why college basketball is great. Why also it can be absolutely agonizing. I can only imagine what Texas Tech fans are feeling. But it's just, again, these reminders of how quickly games can turn. and also why it's important to have players that can make a bunch of shots at the end of a game. Like,
Yeah.
again, I know it's foolish to say like, oh yeah, try to have a Walter Clayton on your team every year, because that would be impossible. But going after at least that style of player that at least gives you a chance, I think that's massive. You just look at this tournament on its own, in particular, how some of these late game situations have gone. You look at the years of, the Mike White years, which again, I don't use it just to kick dirt on that, or anything like that. It's just a perfect example of like, Florida had some good teams, but they could never be better than just okay, because they just didn't have that kind of spurt ability. So yeah, just in a wild game, still stunned Florida won it. The more I look back at it, the more shocked I am that Florida won.
Yeah, I mean, like, and keep in mind, like, this is a podcast. This will be a pod. We will drop. If you want Final Four content, you know where to go. Patreon.com/FloridaBB Hour. Or maybe you don't know where to go. We're going to have so much Final Four content this week. But go to Patreon.com/FloridaBB Hour and subscribe. Your $2 subscription will get you your game preview. 3 or 5 is going to get you some film studies. 5 is going to get you everything. Make sure that you go and subscribe if you're not subscribed already to Florida Basketball Hour or Patreon, because these podcasts, I mean, these are kind of, at this point, I don't want to say special occasions. It's not really like that, but certainly, less of that than what we're doing for the Patreon. The podcast sort of moves the Patreon along, but we are a Patreon site at this point. We haven't rewatched it, is the point. This is kind of a live-ish, and I only say live-ish because Fawcett was nice enough to like wait for me to finish my Saturday Down South column. I will tell people what I wrote about. I still hope you go and read my article. But like, sometimes, and this was an example. So Eric pointed out, like, it's an example of how, like, there are things that happen at the margins that win you basketball games. They missed the front end of a couple 1-and-1s. I thought like Elijah Martin had 2 like just massive rebounds down the stretch against much bigger players in a game where Florida lost rebounds a lot, right? That ended up mattering a huge, huge deal. He had the tip out, like, dunk steal when things were going kind of poorly. He had the drive and finish to get it from 65-55 to 65-57, which I thought gave the bench a little spark. And like, these are still 18 to 23-year kids, and there's this intangible factor. And I think Florida's mentality, Cameron Fry says this was like the inverse of the Elite Eight game versus Louisville. And that's such a good shout, because that Louisville team was less talented than Florida, but coached by Rick Pitino, and they just kept playing. And Florida just kept playing. Like, there was certainly an element to this game, Eric, that was like, this team, without a single player in the top 100 in high school recruiting list, they just were so unbothered by everything that was happening. And then, Tommy Houck hits the 3 to make it 75-69 after the first front end missed. And then they missed the front end. Oh, I think Houck hit the 3 to make it 6. Then Houck fouled, and Stan Van Gundy, who was great, said, "Great foul by Tommy Houck," after he missed the front end. And then Houck hits the 3 to make it a 3-point game. So the back-to-back Tommy Houck threes, the first of which came on like a Tommy Houck soars in for the offensive rebound because Texas Tech starting to chase Clayton everywhere. And then Houck plays like a 2-man game to get himself open and then makes the 3. And all of that came within 1 minute of Florida having what I thought was like one of their most disastrous ATO plays of the whole season, where there's 8.5 seconds on the shot clock. They kind of get a pass to Tommy Houck that should have set up a 3. And for whatever reason, he didn't shoot. I don't know what Florida was running. I don't know what was happening. But like, yeah. And this was the third time. It's the third time, Eric, this season where Florida went into the under 4 media timeout behind And the second time in 3 games, speaking to Eric's charm insistence point, and left the game winners. Just absolutely incredible stuff. And I'd love to get like comprehensively into the basketball game, and maybe we start with how Fawcett did a film study, and this is why you should subscribe to patreon.com/Florida BB Hour, where we like talked, and Rocco Miller and I talked about him today. So we had 2 pieces of Patreon content where we talked about, hey, you know, they run these overload pick and rolls, and it's their bread and butter play, and I really hope Florida has a plan for it. Florida had no plan for it. They had no plan, and they escaped anyway. Just astounding, some of the ways that they got away with what happened.
Yeah, that was another one where pretty like if Florida lost this game, there would just be so many things you could look at as what went wrong. And I think that that was kind of one of them. That the play that there's kind of the 2 plays that Texas Tech runs the most. Those brush screens for kind of those brush inverted ball screens that set up the empty side post ups. Florida got lost on those a couple of times. Those first couple of possessions of the game where Texas Tech got the early buckets, it was off them just completely handling that poorly. And then throughout the game, it was, again, struggling with those angled ball screens because Florida is going to ice and try to send things to the sideline. And they just gave up the short roll every single time. And you did see Texas Tech miss some of those shots when it just turned into kind of floaters, which was the one thing that they maybe inadvertently baited Texas Tech into doing a little bit, but it was also a whole lot of points given up that way. And I think that you also did see Texas Tech shoot the ball quite well in this game. I mean, they shot 37% from 3, but they ended up missing some of the ones I like. Some still pretty good looks. It feels like they could have had even more. And then I think like when you look at some of those missed free throws, I mean, they ended up 7 for 13, so it wasn't like the bulk. It wasn't like they left 12 missed free throws at the line, but it was more the important ones because they're front ends. And then you can start to see why Texas Tech ended up down at 1.11 points per possession, but it really feels like they were better than that number for the reasons I just mentioned. And again, it's just one of those things that, like, I mean, we can talk about Florida not defending particularly well, not coming in with a plan that I thought was particularly good to deal with it. But yeah, it's nice to talk about that after they still find a way to win versus that being the absolutely crushing way they lose, because I do think that would be quite agonizing to watch Texas Tech short roll the Gators over and over and over again without adjustment if they lost. And now we can just be like, well, that's something they gave up, but we're able to overcome.
Yeah, somebody asked me to get the Aberdeen stat out. So yeah, 24-0 now when Denzel Aberdeen hits a 3-pointer in your totally meaningless, preposterous stats of the day. Also, like to Eric's point, how about Florida like coming in the game and like if you just objectively looked at Florida on a KenPom sheet and you're like, is there anything about Florida that really concerns you? And like you hadn't watched them to the detail that maybe Eric or I or a lot of you have, you might say free throw shooting. Florida went 25 of 27 today at the free throw line. Elijah Martin, who it almost became kind of comical that even though he's a 75% free throw shooter, he was shooting 58% entering the game on the front end of one-on-ones. And hits the 2 to put Florida up 80-77. So, you know, kind of bucks his tendency. And then we also like, I wonder what the betting odds were before Hal made the last shot at the end of the game. So I was looking at that, and I meant to address this, Sean. So yeah, the win probability before the Hauk 3 that made it 75-69 was 96.7% Texas Tech. So they weren't quite in the 99 range, but they were up to 97% on the win probability. And then that's on ESPN. And then it flipped a little bit lower and back into the 80s when Florida cut it to 6 with still 2.5 minutes to go. But that's kind of where we were. Yeah, I thought it was interesting that Todd did go to the three bigs at the end to secure rebounds on 3-point shots. I also kind of wondered if it was just like if Texas Tech plays for fast twos or something, maybe, that would backfire because they could miss, and then one of Florida's three worst free throw shooters would be sent to the free throw line, and we might get a Micah Handlockton situation where like he shoots the ball off the top of the backboard almost and commits a silly foul, and Texas Tech comes down to the other end and shoots free throws. But anyway, that did not happen. So yeah, I mean that worked out. Some of the things that happened for Florida worked out, and yeah, I mean the Gator boys do stay hot as Scott has said, and I think we have to talk about Walter Clayton Jr. again, Eric. And I sent Eric a text and said, I'm not really sure. Like, okay, in Steph Curry's building, which makes this even more fun, but I'm not entirely sure I've even seen Steph Curry like drive the lane and then pull out to almost a full sprint and then shoot a three. Like, that was one of the weirdest Walter Clayton plays I thought of his entire career, Eric. And also kind of the whole Walter Clayton experience and 2 jump shots.
Yeah, I did a post game Patreon with a guy named Sean Paul. He's a really good writer, and we talked about that a little bit. But like, just this was kind of similar to the UConn game, where, to be quite honest, I don't think it was a very good Walter Clayton game for a half. And then he, of course, did his magic at the end to make things happen. And again, that really is the experience. And so far, it's been like he can have those slower, kind of had that slower start, and oftentimes, again, he's got the teammates that can kind of lift him up. And this was a game where I wasn't quite sure that was going to happen because Conan didn't look like himself. I presume because of the ankle, but hard to say. And I do think, while we're talking about things that could have gone wrong, I mean, offensively, it looked like for 30 minutes, some of the concerns we had pregame were kind of the situation with the Gators, where it was just like, it just seemed like no one could handle the ball. And it wasn't, not in the sense that everyone was turning the ball over, no one could handle the ball, just in the sense that like Florida just couldn't get a paint touch with their guards. Like, there was just no one who could. And I do think Elijah Hawkins was really good defensively. Something I pointed out in the film study, where he could make Walter Clayton quite uncomfortable, just kind of playing underneath him. But again, it was just like that was one of the things where it was just like Elijah Martin and Will Richard and Walter Clayton are just not guys that can really break someone down and get downhill, or even get downhill off a reversal. And you saw Texas Tech really comfortable switching their bigs onto Elijah Martin, because Elijah Martin isn't someone who can punish a switch. And that was kind of one of the other stories, that it would have been, if Florida doesn't, Walter Clayton specifically, doesn't go crazy at the end of the game and Florida loses this, it'd be pretty easy to say like, well, this is like, unfortunately, one of the concerns we had about the Gators. They struggled to play in the half court. They didn't have enough guys that could create. And so I think that's what's just stunning, is I just wasn't sure that Florida was going to be able to keep this one close enough that Walter Clayton could have his end game magic. It just
Right.
And when it got to 10 in the second half, at the 6-minute mark or whatever it was roughly, I was probably with the win probability chart, where I was starting to feel like, I think it's too much of a hole. And then again, that goes back to the how a number of things do need to go wrong, but also not that many in the scheme of things in college basketball. It's if this was an NBA game with a 24-second clock, Texas Tech is maybe up by 20 in that situation, not 10, but it's 10. You've got the 1-and-1, which of course the NBA doesn't have, or FIBA or anything else, and it just keeps it in. So I just keep coming back to it, but that's the value of having spurtable players in college basketball.
Yeah.
Of course, Walter Clayton being one of those players in college basketball, it's unfair to suggest you just put that guy in your team all the time. But I do think, moving forward and just looking, this is why probably Florida's build needs to continue to have guys that can play that style a little bit more. And once again, I mean, this tournament, if whatever happens at this point, whether it's a Final Four or a national championship, or I guess a loss in the national championship, whatever it is, the possible outcomes from here, I think you can look back at the NCAA tournament for Walter Clayton and say, yeah, we like you saw it all. If anyone hadn't heard about, if someone was an NBA fan parachuting in to watch March Madness, they saw everything from Walter Clayton, all the great, the good, and the bad. It's all been there.
Yeah, just the fifth loss for Texas Tech this season when they were at full strength too. Got 26 minutes from Chase McMillan, who actually played pretty good. I thought he looked really good defensively, and he looked a little awkward offensively at first, but I think some of that, like the cobwebs, came off pretty quick. I do think Will Richard did a nice job on him, honestly, but to Eric's point, like I was disappointed, and I feel like one common thread with some of Florida's games where they've struggled this year is they tend to lose Will Richard a little bit. And like, I kept waiting for them to run something to try to get Will Richard a jump shot, or, try to get him to where he could have one of those sort of north-south straight line baseline drives that he's very good at, getting into that reverse or getting to the free throw line or just anything to get him involved. And I'll ask Todd about it this week at media availability, but I do not think they did a good job of getting Will involved. He only had 6 field goal attempts on the game. I think that given the way Condon was playing, you would never want Alex Condon to equal the number of field goal attempts that Will Richard has. So I thought Florida kind of lost the plot with Will Richard a little bit, Eric. And, when you do that, you really are kind of relying on just some great things happening with your star player. And that's what Florida got at the end of the game. Scott wants to know if Walter Clayton's a top 5 Gator now. Yeah, I mean, I think this is the single best season that a Florida basketball player's ever had. And now he has single-handedly, is not fair, but he has bailed Florida out in 2 NCAA tournament games. He had help from Tommy H., America's sixth man, tonight, but and Tommy Houck was the best player on the floor, Eric. Like, he was the best player in the basketball game. And that, like, I think, and I know, like, you could push back on that, I suppose, and you could make the argument that Darian Williams was the best player in the basketball game. You could. But Tommy Houck's team won. Tommy Houck had the double-double, and Tommy Houck made the bigger plays down the stretch. Darian Williams missed a huge jump shot. Tommy Houck didn't. So I think Tommy Houck was the best player in the game, America's sixth man. Your kind of thoughts on his performance?
Yeah, I mean, like basketball is a game where you need to be able to dribble, and like you need to put pressure on the rim. And again, that's like Florida's guards aren't good at that. And he was the one who was capable of it in the first half. I also think, again, he was someone who didn't look hesitant offensively, and other guys did. And again, I feel like a lot of times we've had games where Florida hasn't played great in the first half, and Elijah Martin hits a bunch of threes, or of course Walter Clayton hits threes, and Will Richard hits a bunch of shots, and that's kind of keeps him in. And I feel like this was, of course, Tom Houck's time, but I for it to happen in this moment with all the guards really struggling in the first half, I thought was big. He was someone who also had to guard every single time down the floor because of how much they were posting up Williams, and I thought he did a solid job there. And so again, I think when you look at what he did on the defensive end, it was really solid. And man, this was not a very good Ruben Chinyelu game. It was pretty rough, and that's something
really
I've been kind of waiting for. Ever since in the offseason, when I was like, I don't know if this guy can be a starter because of his lack of offensive IQ, and you just saw a couple moments where Golden just couldn't hide him anywhere on the floor and couldn't get him off the floor quick enough at times. And there was, a moment he caught in, and right away he turned the ball over in a maybe not super intelligent way, and he immediately got Houck back in the game. And of course, there was a moment there was like, oh, like Houck didn't get much rest, and it was like, yeah, because like Golden does not trust Chinyelu whatsoever. And then after Chinyelu got back in the game, and in several minutes later, he immediately took a post isolation and took a right hook where the ball barely got to the rim. And I thought he was going to get pulled again. He didn't, but it's just one of those things that just it reiterates. I mean, you know what front court combinations Florida trusts for sure. And obviously, for a while now, there's no real ambiguity about who's going to be the player on the court in the last minutes. And again, I think Williams is obviously, like, Williams got Houck a couple of times, like a 6'6". I think even Graham McCaslin joked the other day that Williams is 6'5", which could be true. So whatever it is, he's short and stocky and good with his footwork. And so that's obviously a little tough for Houck, who's taller and lankier. But I still do think he did a pretty rock solid job. And then had moments as well when he needed to get switched on to other players where he could use a little bit more of his mobility. But yeah, I think again it's hard to say, like if you wanted to argue Walter Clayton was the best player in this game, like I get it, because his wins above replacement level player, like he did something that pretty much no one else in the country could have done in the final minutes. So I'm like, if you wanted to actually say, as painful as it is, because I think Walter Clayton played at least 20 minutes of not very good basketball, and then kind of tempered his way in and then started to play great. If someone wanted to say he was the best Gator, that is a reasonable take, I suppose. But I would be with you as well, saying that how, particularly with what he did on the defensive end, in addition, I thought he was the best. And for that to be someone that comes off the bench, for that to be a second-year player, and for that to come in the Elite Eight in a challenging matchup, that's pretty special. And I mean, I've said like very few things about next year. I know a lot of people are talking about who's gonna, what the team's gonna look like next year, and I haven't really engaged any of those conversations. And so I guess I'm breaking that a little bit to say, but you just, you got to think when next year he's really going to be a problem. He's going to be really, really good.
Yeah, no, I think he's gonna. I mean, he'll certainly be first team All SEC and should be in the preseason, and we'll see, what exactly his ceiling is. I don't know if I'll have to think about a comparison. I'm seeing people tossing out Chandler Parsons, Dorian Finney-Smith in the chat, and like, Florida's had big guys that can play like that a little bit, but Houck is almost more guard-like than either of those guys. And then, it made great play defensively in the comeback, right? He was the one guy who could get a stop on JT Toppin down the stretch. I also thought Micah Handlockton helped quite a bit with some of Florida's 2-point defense tonight, and was, I don't think it was by default. Like, Chinyelu was minus 13 in 11 minutes. So it gives you an idea of how bad he was. Ooh. But it's hard to be that bad in a game you win by 5. But I thought Micah played pretty well. I thought his verticality was good. Thought his rebounding was much tougher than Condon's was. He wasn't losing the ball on rebounds. He was strong, keeping it, and then like making smart plays. He had the one pass, I think, that was a turnover, where I think he thought somebody would be in a spot that they just weren't in, and he threw the ball out of bounds. But otherwise, a good Micah Handlockton game, and maybe not a game that Florida wins if Micah doesn't risk the red shirt to come back, quite honestly. Because then they would have really been stuck with Ruben Chinyelu or Alex Condon playing on one leg. The Condon thing is something to monitor as Florida gets ready for the Final Four, particularly because Condon was so effective against Janai Broom. So if they get that matchup, it's worth watching. If they don't get that matchup, we'll see. Eric and I obviously can't do a live podcast and talk about that matchup because they don't even play that game till tomorrow late afternoon. If it isn't Auburn, then like Jackson Collar and who's the other guy that they play a lot, Eric? Is it Zapala?
Zapala. Well, yeah. Playing a little bit less recently
Yeah, a
Michigan
little
State,
less. A little less.
Michigan State fans are pretty out on him, and even it's been more Carson Cooper's that other.
Yeah, Carson Cooper's
He's
play. That's
playing
right.
a little bit more.
Yeah, they're kind of out on Zapala. They might need Zapala against Florida. That would be interesting because, like, I know Michigan State fans would argue with me, like, but their guards aren't as good as Florida's. So, like,
Zapala is also very, very strange in that, like, even like when things were going good, he would start. Like, he started every game until this last game. But I mean, there's multiple games where he starts and plays 7 minutes a game, 8 minutes a game, 10 minutes of the game. So, like, yeah, just to note for people, that's like, it's like very like old school NBA where teams would put in like Kurt Thomas as a starter and then he'd like play 9 minutes only, and that's kind of Zapala. But yeah, so I do think yeah, they've got the bodies at the 5 for sure. Yeah, what the quality are arguable, but yeah, in terms of quantity, yeah, they do have 3 guys in Jackson Kohler, Carson Cooper, Zaman Zapala, even not a freshman, a sophomore, and Xavier Booker, who's plays a little more at the 4, hardly playing, but that's like a 6'11", 240-pound high pedigree guy. So they do have the bodies, but again, which honestly was, again, if we're talking about, I know I've interrupted you from a point you were probably making, so I hope you're able to get back to it. But
no, you're good.
That's even another thing I was talking with Sean Paul on the Patreon, and something we were talking about during the game is just like, there's also a moment, and of course Alex Condon was injured, so like, take it with a grain of salt, but it is a reminder to me, like, Florida's depth is in the front court is great / front court generally, but there's something to be said about just who has the best guys, who's got the best 5, who's got the best players on the floor, and luckily Hauk was one of those guys, but they didn't really have a second. I thought, again, I did think Mike Anlefton was good. It's still, he's going to be inherently kind of limited by his style of play, but so Florida had really like 4 playable front court guys in this game, but really only one of them was really good, and against a Texas Tech team that has 2.5 playable bodies, but 2 of them are really good, and they could have won that front court battle. So anyways, there's some things we're thinking about for general roster build.
I was saying I couldn't agree more with that. I think that's, like, Florida's going to have some work to do once it's time to get into all that. I mean, even tonight, like, I know I mentioned the Denzel Aberdeen stat, but and I thought Denzel, like, Florida had a bunch of guys that didn't play great defensively tonight. Like, I thought Denzel was pretty good in terms of his defense, but Denzel also, he kind of, I thought the first mid-range jump shot was fine because it was so open. But there was another possession. Like, I don't need a Denzel Aberdeen mid-range J with 21 seconds on the shot clock, Eric. Like, that's not going to cut it for me in a game where we're valuing every possession. And to be honest, like, Florida kind of took care of the ball, kind of, sort of better than I like. Look, if you had told me before the game that Florida would have 12 turnovers, I probably would have said, okay, like, their season average +1, I will take that. So Florida having the 12 turnovers, to me, like, a bad early shot clock shot is, it's not the same as a turnover, but it's bad, And by the way, when Denzel took that shot, it like led to transition points because there was a long rebound and Florida didn't have floor balance and it was a mess. So now I thought that Texas Tech did a nice job actually in transition when they were on offense in this game too. And I have to admit, I was wrong in the pregame chat because I was like, yeah, Texas Tech doesn't want to run with Florida. And they were fine, like, getting up and down with Florida. They were better. Eric was right. They were better than I thought they were. But my point is, like, as good as Aberdeen was in the Sweet 16, he was decidedly average to slightly below average tonight. And, whatever. I mean, Florida got out of here. They escaped. They won. If I'm taking away anything from it, I tweeted about it. Like, I just feel like this team showed incredible competitive character. it would have, and I know that, you want to say that nobody gives up down 9 in the Elite Eight, but like you've gotten the crap beat out of you. You haven't shot the ball well. You can't stop a particular play. Like there were a lot of reasons for Florida to just be like, you know what? We had a hell of a season. We won 33 games. That's that. And that wasn't what Florida did. They just fought their butts off to the end. And now they're going to the program's 6 Final Four. And look, man, like 6 Final Fours is the second most in the SEC. They have now eclipsed Arkansas, who still claims the 5, even though 3 of them happened before they let black people play sports. But yeah, I mean, 6 Final Fours is really good. There aren't a lot of programs in America that have done that. Florida's one of the 10 winningest programs in the last 25 years. In a lot of ways, it's very validating to like the idea of starting a podcast about Florida basketball, because this is what I thought. Not that I thought Florida would be 34-4 all the time, but this is what I thought Florida on their better days and better seasons would be capable of, is special seasons like this. And to get back to the Final Four was incredible. So thank you all, especially those of you who have gone to patreon.com/FloridaBB and subscribed. We really, really appreciate your support, because we are Patreon based at this point. And we're going to have a lot of really fun content for you for the Final Four. I'm headed to San Antonio. Going to go visit the Alamo, which is going to be kind of fun and cheesy, but got to do it. And yeah, man. So thank you all. Incredible night for Florida's program.
Yeah, we'll certainly get into talking a little bit more about when we break down the season. You mentioned like, oh, did you think the Gators were going to be here? I mean, it's going to be no surprise that I certainly didn't. So I think that's also one of the things that made this run from whatever happens next kind of special, is the fact that I don't want to say it came out of nowhere, because that would be I wouldn't say that this one, this came out of nowhere necessarily for a team like Florida, because again, I'm kind of the opinion that Florida should be in the mix for this somewhat regularly. And again, I think that's why when a lot of people were happy with the results of last year, I was the one being like, nah, come on, man. Like this is not what we should be celebrating. But yeah, it's certainly just one of the things that has made this quite a special season for whatever happens next. And again, it is one of those things as well that I think that there was some kind of we didn't really have this discussion, but I've thought about it. I think I talked to it with a couple of people on Patreon, conversations throughout the last couple of weeks about like what it would take in the postseason. Or I talked about it with Malik. That's what I think I talked with it about what it would take for it to be a successful season based on what Florida did in the NCAA tournament. Like, could Florida have lost in the first round and had it be a successful season? Like, how do you weigh a single game elimination tournament versus what happened? And I don't know where everyone lands, and I know everyone is like, hey, we should be like this. Florida should be competing for a championship, and anything short of that is disappointing. But I do think for most people, whatever Florida does from now is somewhat found money. And yeah, definitely looking forward to seeing who Florida plays next. But the fact that it's between an Auburn team that the Gators have already handled comfortably, and a Michigan State team who plays a style of basketball that I think the Gators have handled quite comfortably multiple times this season. The pathway is certainly there. I mean, we're recording this during the Duke Alabama game, and I haven't been watching it closely, but Duke is doing the Duke thing and is really rolling a team that I think is really good. But it's going to be big. And I'll also say, Neil, you mentioned the pregame chat. Something that I just thought of doing a little bit too late. So for those of you who missed that our Patreon subscribers would have done that, I apologize. But we did a Zoom pregame hangout just half an hour before the game. Let's talk about Texas Tech and talk about the game, and it was honestly super fun. So I will agree in principle to do that Saturday. Neil, you will not be able to, since you'll be at the venue. But that's something that I will likely host. We of course don't know if Florida will be the first or the second game.
Love it.
So I will say that if Florida is the second game, I do not want to be. I want to watch it. I want to watch the first game, just to be honest. So I will say, in principle, I will be hosting for Patreon members a pregame hangout on Zoom, half an hour before the first game, whether Florida is the first game or second. So I do want to just shout that out as something that that'll be there. And yeah, I guess maybe Neil will jump on if the Gators are the second game, and he wants to jump on from his phone for a second. But unlikely if he's watching Florida warm up from the media section. But did want to mention just one more thing we're doing for Patreon, and for those of you who did jump on before Texas Tech, that was super fun. So thanks for making that happen last minute.
Yeah, no, I think I will try to hop on. We'll see. I know we got a lot of good stuff planned, but yeah, ad libs. I'll close with this. He asked where this one ranks all time. This is a top 5 Florida win ever, right? Just everything that goes into being down. I think it was actually 7 at the final media timeout, but 9 right after it. So they actually were down by less. They ended up being down by 9 after the final media timeout, even though they were only down 7 going into it. So it seemed even more over. And then all of that happened. And I really still can't explain the fact that Walt Clayton, after just not hitting anything all night, made those shots. But he did. Who do we want to play in the Final Four? I mean, Auburn is better than Michigan State. So Michigan State, record it.
I think I'm shocked Michigan State is here. I don't want to jinx anything if it. But to be honest with you, I'll be shocked if the Gators are playing Michigan State. I'd be shocked if they beat Auburn, to be quite honest. But I'm shocked that they're there. And if it was a situation, Florida, I'll just give the heads up right away. The start of my pregame film study for Patreon. If the Gators are playing Michigan State, I think Florida wins by multiple possessions.
Which is how you have to beat them, since they're 12-2 in games decided by 6 points or less.
Yeah, no, good point.
Tom Izzo, man. But yeah, Florida's better than Michigan State at every position on the floor, which is not the case with the Auburn Tigers. And I know Elijah Martin didn't play in the last game, but I don't know if Todd Pettiford is going to go 1 for 6 from the floor again. So that's kind of a no-brainer. But right now we don't have to worry about any of that. Florida's in the Final Four. Duke looks about right off Alabama, but Florida's headed to the Final Four. Duke may be joining them shortly, barring a comeback. And that's kind of all I got to say. I'll let Eric Fawcett sign us off on a Final Four episode where the Gators are winners in the Elite Eight.
Yeah, hope everyone enjoyed. And I know people enjoyed the game, and hopefully your heart rate's down by the time you listen to it. Join the Patreon, tell your friends, get all kinds of content this week. And enjoy this time. Sometimes it goes quick between that Friday, Sunday, Thursday, Saturday, those quick turnarounds, but it is kind of nice to have the week to look forward to the game and think about the games. And also, we'll certainly be providing lots of content for you to catch up. I'm excited to do a little film breakdown of what happened against Texas Tech, because it's certainly going to be fascinating and be a nice companion to listening to this podcast and all we talked about. But thankful for everyone who's listening. Thankful for everyone to have a team like this they can enjoy. So go Gators and keep attacking closeouts.